And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Tuesday morning, flying weather graphic here showing a lot of IFR with that system moving across the northern Bering Sea into the Yukon Delta and then also pushing on to the northwest coast, extending southward to the Pribilof Islands. Otherwise, the interior, VFR, all the way into Canada. Marginal VFR for the southeast coast to about Yakutat and then covering the Gulf of Alaska. And for the afternoon, VFR all the way from the North Slope down into the Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet area, Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, mostly marginal for the Panhandle and along the Gulf of over the Gulf of Alaska and right along the coastline. IFR here kind of retreats back from the coast there, the Yukon Delta, and covers much of the northern Bering Sea southward with a warm front there to the Pribilof Islands. Marginal VFR from Nikolsky westward to Shimya on Alaska Island. VFR tomorrow afternoon, as well as the inland areas of the Alaska Peninsula. And then for Wednesday morning, IFR here stuck over the northern and eastern Bering Sea all the way down to the Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians there, right up to the coastline and then into the western Seward Peninsula, and that's about all the farther east it gets. Otherwise, VFR in the interior now from the Arctic coast southward. Some marginal VFR possibly showing up over southern Cook Inlet, up into Prince William Sound, covering the Gulf of Alaska into the Panhandle. And then for the afternoon, IFR stays put here, mostly off the coast or along the coast and over the eastern Bering Sea, now spreading down into the far western areas of the Bristol Bay zone. Marginal for the Aleutians, VFR in the interior, all the way up to the Arctic coast. A lot of marginal VFR here surrounding Kodiak Island, again up into Cook Inlet, Prince William Sound, and down across the southern Panhandle. Passes for Tuesday, both Anatuvik and Atigun, VFR. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, VFR also. Same forecast for rainy, good VFR. For windy as well as Isabel, Mentasta, all looking VFR. Tanita, same forecast, VFR. Portage, VFR. Chilcoot White starting out marginal, trending toward VFR throughout the afternoon. And for the freezing levels, 2,000 to 4,000 feet here, 4,000 feet right over the greater Fairbanks area. 2,000 feet, northern Panhandle, and about 4,000 feet down to the south. And out to the west here, big push of warm air into the Bering Sea with ahead of that slow-moving system that kind of stalls out here over the area. So that'll pull 10,000 feet onto the map now with 8,000 feet north of the west central Aleutians. And for the icing, considerable moderate rime icing here, right along, through the Bering Strait, southward covering all of the eastern Bering Sea, Pribilof Islands, down into the east central Aleutians. None in the interior. Possible icing threat here over the eastern Copper River Basin and along the North Gulf Coast there with some heavier icing possible over the southern Panhandle. And the jet stream here, good wind flow, keeping the moisture flowing into the southern southeast coastal areas for that heavier icing possibility there, up to 140 to 120 knots there as it makes landfall. Northeasterly winds around this high pressure here over eastern Norton Sound, 70 to 75 knots through the interior, and then back around to the south here ahead of that next storm, up to 90 knots right across St. Matthew Island, and 130 knot northwest winds there across the western Aleutians. 9,000 feet, west-southwest winds here take a turn more from south to north from the Bering Strait into the Chukchi Sea at about 55 knots. 50 knots or 60 knots there near the Pribilof Islands, turning west-northwest at 60 knots out to the west. Light over the interior, westerlies at about 45 into the Panhandle, 3,000 feet. Low pressure here just off the north coast of the southeast coast. Wind's not too strong with this feature at this elevation. Light over the interior, but increasing winds here as that front edges eastward across the northern Bering Sea, anywhere from 45 to 60 knots in that area. Looking at turbulence, considerable moderate turbulence here from the western Arctic coast, about Point Lay southward into the northern and eastern Bering Sea, into the Yukon Delta, down to the Pribilof Islands, and then along and north of the Aleutians, another area of considerable moderate turbulence, otherwise pretty smooth. Elsewhere, from the interior and the Arctic coast, all the way down across the Gulf and into the southeast coast.